The cavernous hall of the state's 12th District Court was not, contrary to popular belief, a temple of blind justice. It was a theater, and every day a meticulously choreographed play of power, fear, and consequence unfolded upon its worn wooden stage. And for Mark Rourke, a man whose very being had become intertwined with the polished brass of his bailiff's badge, it was his personal kingdom. The air itself seemed to bend around him as he moved, a force of nature in a crisp uniform, his posture so rigid it seemed to defy the very pull of gravity. He knew the rhythms of this place, the unspoken rules, the hierarchy as immutable as law itself. And at the very top of that food chain, just beneath the imposing figure of Judge Harriet Miller, was him. His morning began, as it always did, with a slow, possessive patrol of the perimeter. His eyes, pale and sharp as flint, scanned the growing crowd of the damned and the anxious waiting on the hard oak benches. He saw the usual tapestry of human frailty, the young man in a cheap suit picking nervously at a thumbnail, his future hanging by a thread, the weeping woman clutching a handkerchief, her life unraveling in public, the jaded, tired faces of those for whom this was merely a depressing routine. To Mark, they were not people with stories, but set dressing, obstacles to his efficient management of the day's drama. He took a certain cold satisfaction in the way they averted their gaze when he passed, the subtle shrinking of shoulders, the quick intake of breath. It was a testament to his authority, a palpable energy he both cultivated and fed upon. His particular disdain, however, was reserved for the lawyers, especially the green ones. And there was none greener, none more deliciously flappable than David Chen. Mark watched him now, a hurricane of nervous energy at the prosecution's table, fumbling through a towering stack of case files, his fingers leaving faint smudges of sweat on the manila folders. A cruel smirk played on Mark's lips. He decided to make his move. He ambled over, his boots producing a firm, authoritative click-clack that silenced the murmured conversations around him. He stopped directly behind David, looming over him. "Problem, counselor?" Mark's voice was a low rumble, meant for David's ears alone but carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby spectators. David jumped slightly, startled. "Oh, no, Bailiff Rourke. Just final prep for the docket call." Mark reached out a thick finger and tapped a specific file near the bottom of the pile. "That the Henderson motion? The one Her Honor was specific about having first? Buried it, did you? Hoping she'd forget." His tone was falsely helpful, laced with a venomous knowingness. David's eyes widened in panic. "What? No. It's right here, He began frantically shuffling papers, his composure crumbling under Mark's gaze. The more he searched, the more disordered the pile became. Mark let him flail for a full 30 seconds, a predator toying with its prey. He could feel the eyes of the gallery on them, could sense their shared, vicarious anxiety. Finally, with a theatrical sigh, he reached down, plucked the clearly labeled Henderson file from the middle of the stack, and dropped it on top with a dismissive thud. "Eyes open, Chin. This isn't law school. We maintain order here." The humiliation was precise, surgical, and utterly complete. David's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, and he could only nod, muttering a thanks that sounded more like a plea for mercy. Mark turned away, his chest swelling with a familiar, toxic pride. Order had been maintained. His order. It was in the wake of this small victory that his eyes, ever scanning for the slightest disruption, found her. A woman. She had entered silently through the heavy double doors and stood for a moment, looking uncertain. She was in her late 50s, perhaps, dressed in a simple, unassuming navy blue dress. Her hair was swept back into a practical but not stylish bun. She carried a small, worn leather satchel. She looked like every other nervous, out-of-place soul who wandered in off the street, overwhelmed by the grandeur and gravity of the place. To Mark Rourke, she was a ripple in his perfectly still pond. An anomaly. A problem. She moved to the front of the gallery and took a seat in the first row, just behind the bar that separated the spectators from the official proceedings. It was a section Mark had explicitly cordoned off with a velvet rope and a small, clear sign that read reserved for case 12/4587. He had done it himself. The sign was impossible to miss. A fresh wave of irritation washed over him. This was exactly what he couldn't stand, the utter disregard for the rules, the assumption that the clearly stated boundaries didn't apply to them. It was a personal insult to his authority, a stain on the pristine order of his domain. He didn't simply walk toward her. He advanced, a storm cloud gathering in a uniform. The clicking of his boots was sharper now, a staccato warning beat. Conversations died in his wake as the gallery's attention shifted from their own troubles to the fresh drama unfolding before them. He stopped directly in front of her, his shadow falling over her like a chill. She was looking down, rummaging in her satchel, and hadn't noticed his approach. He cleared his throat, not a polite ahem, but a sharp, grating sound. She looked up, and he was met with a pair of calm, intelligent brown eyes. There was a quiet curiosity in them, but no fear. "Not yet." "You," he said, his voice loud and projecting, ensuring every soul in the vicinity could hear the pronouncement. "Oh, this section is closed." He jabbed a finger toward the sign, though he made no move to allow her to actually read it. The command was absolute. The woman, Elena Vasquez, blinked, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "I'm sorry? I didn't see Mark cut her off, his voice dripping with sarcastic disbelief. "Didn't see it? It's right there. Big letters. Or can you not read?" The cruelty of the question hung in the air, a deliberate public shaming. A few people in the benches behind her shifted uncomfortably. David Chin looked up from his table, his own humiliation momentarily forgotten, his face a mask of concern. Elena's posture straightened. The initial surprise in her eyes cooled into something else, something unreadable. "I can read, thank you. It was an honest mistake. I will move." But Mark was not finished. The audience was captivated, and he was the star of this show. "An honest mistake," he repeated, mocking her phrasing. "People like you always think the rules are just suggestions. You think your time is more important than everyone else's? That you don't have to pay attention? This is a court of law, not a bus station." He pointed a rigid arm toward the very back of the room, to the hard, uncomfortable benches under the dim lights. "Find another seat. Now. And try to be more observant." It was a performance of pure, unadulterated power. He had taken a simple, common error and turned it into a capital crime, tried and convicted her in the public square of his courtroom. From the corner of his eye, he saw David Chin half rise from his chair. "Mark, it's really okay, she can just—" His voice was tentative, trying to pour oil on waters he knew were toxic. Mark turned his glare on the young lawyer, silencing him instantly. "Stay out of it, counselor. This doesn't concern you. This is my courtroom. I keep order here." The message was for everyone. "I am the law here today." He turned back to Elena. She had gathered her satchel and stood up. Her face was a carefully composed mask, but a faint pink flush on her neck betrayed the embarrassment he had so skillfully inflicted. As she moved past him, he couldn't resist a final, parting shot, delivered in a low mutter meant only for her. "Try to pay attention next time. Save us all the trouble." Elena Vasquez paused for a fraction of a second. She didn't look at him. She didn't speak. She simply absorbed the insult, and then, with a quiet dignity that somehow felt more powerful than all of Mark's bluster, she walked calmly to the very last row and took a seat, disappearing into the shadows. A profound silence blanketed the room. Mark adjusted his tie, smoothed down his uniform and returned to his post near the judge's bench. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, a mixture of fear, resentment, and awe. The air crackled with his authority. He had done it again. He had asserted his control, crushed a challenge to his domain, and reminded every single person in the room of their place. He stood a little taller, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a perfect, untouchable king in his castle of law and order. The satisfaction was a warm, familiar glow in his chest. This was where he belonged. This was power. The gavel fell with a sound like a bone breaking, its sharp crack a period on the morning's first sentence of justice. Judge Harriet Miller's voice, dry and precise as a legal document, cut through the lingering tension. "Court is in recess for 15 minutes. Counselors, my chambers. Now." It was not a request. The spell of formal proceeding broke, and the courtroom exhaled a collective breath, the rustle of papers and the shuffle of feet replacing the oppressive silence. Mark Rourke allowed himself a small internal smile of satisfaction. The machine had functioned perfectly, and he, its chief engineer, had oiled the gears with a firm hand. He watched the gallery begin to stir, a herd of anxious faces, and his gaze, almost of its own volition, flicked to the very back row, seeking confirmation of his absolute control. She was still there, the woman in the navy blue dress, her head bent over a small notepad. The sight was a final, pleasing punctuation to his victory. She had been put in her place. Order was restored. His duty was clear. He moved with purpose to escort the judge. He reached her bench just as she was standing, gathering her robes. "A productive morning, Your Honor," he said, his voice a model of respectful efficiency. He held the side door open for her, the one that led to the private hallway connecting to her chambers. Judge Miller did not acknowledge his comment. She swept past him without a word, her expression unreadable, a carved monument of jurisprudence. This was not unusual. She was a woman of few words outside her rulings. Mark fell into step behind her, then moved to lead the way, his boots sinking into the plush, sound-deadening carpet of the private corridor. The air here was different, still and cool, smelling of old wood and lemon polish, a world away from the nervous sweat and cheap perfume of the public gallery. This was the inner sanctum, and his privilege to walk these halls was a point of immense personal pride. He was not just a bailiff, he was a gatekeeper. David Chin followed a few paces behind, his steps hesitant. Mark could almost feel the young lawyer's anxiety radiating off him. Probably worried about that misplaced file, fearing a reprimand. Good. You should be worried. Sloppiness had no place here. Mark arrived at the heavy, dark oak door marked Chambers, Judge H. Miller. He gave a firm, respectful knock, then opened it, holding it for the judge and then for Chin, who scurried in with a nervous nod. Mark made to follow, to take his usual position against the bookshelf, ready to be of service, but Judge Miller paused just inside the doorway. "Close the door, bailiff," she said, her voice flat. It was then that Mark's perfectly ordered world began its first, imperceptible tilt. The room was not empty. Seated in a high-backed leather armchair opposite the judge's monumental desk was the woman, Elena Vasquez. She sat with a posture of calm composure, her hands folded in her lap, her worn leather satchel on the floor beside her. She was not writing now. She was simply waiting, and her calm, intelligent eyes were fixed directly on him. Confusion, sharp and immediate, short-circuited Mark's thought process. What was she doing here? How had she gotten past him? This was a secured area. Had she complained? Had some lower-level clerk brought her back here to hear some petty grievance? A hot spike of anger flashed through him. This was an outrage, an intrusion into this sacred space. He opened his mouth, ready to take control of the situation, to escort this trespasser out immediately. "Your Honor," he began, his voice laced with a blend of apology and authority, "I apologize for this interruption. I don't know how this person was admitted, but I will have her removed at once." Judge Miller turned slowly from where she was placing her court files on the desk. Her gaze, when it met his, was not merely stern, it was glacial. It was the look she reserved for perjurers and repeat offenders who showed no remorse. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David Chin, forgotten near the door, looked like he wished he could melt into the paneling. "This person," Judge Miller said, her voice low and dangerously quiet, each word enunciated with the precision of a scalpel, "is Ms. Elena Vasquez." The name hung in the air, meaningless to Mark, but heavy with significance from the judge's lips. He stood his ground, his mind racing, trying to place the name. A local politician? A news reporter? It didn't matter. No one had the right to be in these chambers uninvited. Judge Miller did not wait for his recognition. She took a slow step toward him, her black robes whispering against the carpet. "Ms. Vasquez is a guest in my courtroom. More than that, she is a guest in my city. And even more than that, she is my guest in this chamber." She paused, letting the weight of each statement land. "She is here because I invited her. I asked her to observe the proceedings of my court today and provide me with her professional assessment of its efficiency, its atmosphere, and its decorum." Mark's brain struggled to keep up. Professional assessment? Of his courtroom? Who was this woman? The first cold trickle of dread began to seep through his armor of arrogance. Judge Miller's eyes never left his. Ms. Vasquez was, until her retirement last year, the Dean of Ethical Jurisprudence at Stanford Law School. She has advised Supreme Courts in 3 states on courtroom conduct and procedural integrity. She wrote the book, quite literally, on the ethical responsibilities of court officers. The book, I might add, that was part of your own training curriculum, Bailiff Rourke. The information hit Mark like a series of physical blows. Stanford. Dean. The book. He remembered the dry, dense textbook from his academy days. He had barely skimmed it. The author's name had been a meaningless string of letters. Now, those letters had formed into this quiet, unassuming woman in the navy blue dress, the woman he had publicly eviscerated for sitting in the wrong chair. The cold trickle of dread became a flood, freezing him to the spot. His badge felt not like a shield but like a target pinned to his chest. The judge continued, her voice still quiet but now vibrating with a contained fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. "So you can imagine my interest, Bailiff Rourke, in the feedback she has so far provided." She picked up a single sheet of paper from her desk, Elena's notepad page. She didn't need to read from it. Her eyes held him prisoner. She described, in meticulous detail, the public humiliation of a young attorney trying to find his footing. She noted the creation of an environment of fear and intimidation for the spectators, those very citizens this court is meant to serve. And she provided me with a verbatim account of her own interaction with my senior bailiff. An interaction that included questioning her literacy and suggesting her presence was a waste of this court's valuable time. Mark's mouth was utterly dry. He tried to form a word, an excuse, anything, but no sound emerged. He could only stand there, a statue of shame, as the judge laid bare his every action under a lens of devastating context. "The greatest disruption to the decorum of my courtroom today," Judge Miller said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "was not a confused visitor. It was not a flustered lawyer. It was a toxic abuse of authority. It was you, Bailiff Rourke. You turned my courtroom into your personal stage for a performance of petty tyranny." She let the silence stretch, allowing the full horrifying scope of his error to saturate the room, to seep into the very shelves of law books that surrounded them, as if his failure was now being recorded for permanent legal history. "You believed your badge made you the master of that room. It does not. It makes you its servant. And today you failed in your service spectacularly." The 15-minute recess stretched into an eternity of silent condemnation within the judge's chambers. For Mark Rourke, it was not a passage of time but a dissolution of self. The imposing figure of the bailiff, the man who commanded respect with a glance and silence with a presence, had crumbled into dust, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He stood by the bookcase not at attention, but simply because his legs had not yet received the command to buckle. He did not look at Judge Miller, nor at the still, calm form of Elena Vasquez. His eyes were fixed on a single point on the Persian rug, studying the intricate pattern as if the swirling dyes held the secret to undoing the last hour of his life. The judge's words were not just spoken, they were branded onto his consciousness. "Petty tyranny. Toxic abuse. Failed in your service." Each phrase was a hammer blow, shattering the polished veneer of his career and his identity. The weight of his badge, once a symbol of unassailable power, now felt like a lead weight sewn into his uniform, pulling him toward the earth. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the courtroom beyond the door, the coughs, the shuffling, the low murmur of life continuing. It was the sound of a world moving on without him, a world he was no longer fit to police. The sharp buzz of the judge's intercom finally broke the silence. Her clerk's voice, tinny and impersonal, announced, 2 minutes, Your Honor." The spell was broken. Judge Miller rose from her desk, her movements economical and filled with purpose. She looked at Mark, and for the first time, her gaze was not entirely of anger but of grim, disappointed resolve. "You will return to the courtroom. You will take your place. You will not speak until I instruct you to do so. Is that understood?" Her voice allowed for no possibility of dissent. Mark could only manage a stiff, jerky nod, his throat constricted, his tongue a useless piece of leather in his mouth. The walk back down the private corridor was a perverse parody of his earlier confident stride. He was no longer leading. He was being led to his own execution. He held the door for the judge, his movements robotic, and then followed her and a pale, wide-eyed David Chin back into the bright, vast space of the courtroom. The gallery, which had been a restless sea of noise, fell into an immediate and profound hush. It was a silence different from the respectful quiet that preceded a judge's entrance. This was the breathless, anticipatory silence of an audience sensing the climax of a drama. Every eye was upon them, and Mark felt their collective gaze like a physical pressure. He mechanically took his post beside the witness stand, his usual position, but it felt alien and exposed. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, on the great seal of the state behind the judge's bench, seeing nothing. Judge Miller settled into her high-backed chair. She did not immediately call the court to order. Instead, she let the silence deepen, allowing the tension to coil itself into a tight spring. She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping slowly across the faces in the gallery, past the confused defendants, past the intrigued lawyers, before finally coming to rest, heavy and inevitable, upon Mark. "Before we resume today's docket," she began, her voice not loud, but carrying with crystal clarity to the farthest corner of the room, "this court must address a grave matter of misconduct. A breach of the sacred trust bestowed upon those who are sworn to uphold the dignity of these proceedings." She paused, and the only sound was the faint, nervous rustle of fabric. "Bailiff Rourke, step forward. To the center of the well, please." The command was like an electric shock. Every instinct in Mark's body screamed at him to refuse, to run, to hide. But the discipline of years now turned against him, forced his feet to move. The click of his boots on the hardwood floor was deafening in the silence. He walked the short distance to the empty space before the bench and turned to face her, standing at a rigid, miserable attention. He was a specimen pinned to a board, on display for the entire world to see. Judge Miller did not address him first. She spoke to the room. This court operates on a foundation of respect. Not the respect demanded by fear, but the respect earned through fairness, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all who enter. Today that foundation was cracked by the very officer tasked with its protection. She then looked down at him, her eyes like flint. Bailiff Rourke, you will now turn and face the citizens you were sworn to serve. You will offer a full, unequivocal, and public apology. You will apologize specifically to Ms. Elena Vasquez, whom you publicly maligned. You will apologize to the gallery for creating an environment of intimidation and for abusing the authority they grant you with their presence. And you will apologize to Mr. Chin for your persistent and unprofessional conduct. It was the worst possible punishment. A suspension, a firing, that would have been a clean, if devastating, wound. This was a slow, public flaying of his pride. He was being ordered to dismantle, with his own words, the persona he had spent a lifetime building. The heat of 1,000 eyes burned into his back. He could feel their curiosity, their schadenfreude, their pity. He slowly, painfully turned around. The faces were a blur, a sea of indistinct features, except for one. In the very back row, Elena Vasquez sat watching him. Her expression was not smug, not vengeful. It was simply observant, waiting. It was this lack of gloating that made it somehow worse. He opened his mouth. A dry, croaking sound emerged. He swallowed, trying to find moisture, trying to find his voice. He began, the word a fragile thing breaking in the silent room. I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies. The words were ash in his mouth. To Ms. Vasquez. He forced himself to look toward the back. My behavior was arrogant, cruel, and unacceptable. I misused my authority to humiliate you for a simple mistake, and I am profoundly ashamed. He took a ragged breath. To everyone here today. His gaze swept over the blur of faces, seeing now a few nodding slowly, others just watching, stunned. I failed you. I created an atmosphere of fear where there should be safety, of disrespect where there should be dignity. I forgot that my power comes from your trust, and I betrayed that trust. He finally turned slightly toward the defense table. David, Mr. Chin, I have consistently treated you with disrespect and undermined your confidence. For that I am truly sorry. There is no excuse. With each sentence, a weight lifted from the room and settled squarely upon his own shoulders. The arrogant bailiff was gone, and in his place stood a humbled, broken man, stripped bare before the entire world. The silence that followed his last word was absolute. Judge Miller spoke again. Your apology is noted for the record. However, an apology without consequence is merely words. She pronounced his sentence with the same dispassionate tone she might use for a sentencing hearing. You are suspended from your duties, effective immediately, without pay, pending a full review by the court's disciplinary board. Furthermore, and before any consideration of reinstatement, you will complete 200 hours of community service. And you will do so out of uniform. You will perform this service not as Bailiff Rourke, but as Mark Rourke, a citizen of this community, subject to the same rules and civilities you so readily enforced upon others. She picked up her gavel, the finality of the sound echoing through the completely silent court. This court stands in recess for 1 hour. The crack of the gavel was the sound of his world ending. He stood, frozen for a long moment, unable to move. It was David Chin who finally moved toward him, not with triumph, but with a hesitant, almost pitying look, and gently touched his arm, guiding him from the well of the court. Mark moved like a sleepwalker, his head down, avoiding every gaze. He was escorted not to his post but to the side door, through which he would exit the courtroom and his career for the last time. As he passed the back row he did not look up. He had seen enough. The true power, he understood now, was not in the badge he would have to surrender, or in the uniform he would no longer be allowed to wear. It was in the quiet, unwavering integrity of the law itself, a force that could and would humble anyone who forgot that they were merely its servant, from the highest judge to the lowest citizen. And he had forgotten. The lesson had been learned in the most searing way possible, a permanent scar on his soul, a story that would be told in this courthouse for years to come, a cautionary tale about the man who thought his badge made him untouchable, until he brought the wrong woman to court. If you found this story of justice and humility compelling, and you would like to explore more narratives where actions meet their consequences and pride faces its reckoning, we invite you to subscribe for more. Your support helps us continue to share these important lessons. Thank you for reading.